Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. It's time to turn on and tune in because today's guest is the OG of integrative medicine, a true pioneer of health, a legend of mind-body healing, the medical mystic himself, Dr. Andrew Weil. A graduate of Harvard and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Weil has spent basically the last 50 plus years studying and evangelizing holistic wellness, underappreciated healing modalities, medicinal plants, and the reform of medical education and practice. Named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine, he's also a New York Times bestselling author of 15 books. He's the founder and director of the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona, as well as the founder of matcha tea brand Matcha Kari, and a partner in True Kitchen, a chain of something like 35 healthy food restaurants. This man is a gift, and this is a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation that spans his extraordinary life and delves into many important aspects of human and planetary health. So please hit that subscribe button, click that notification bell thing, and enjoy. It's a pleasure to meet you. It's an honor. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure.
I'm excited to be here with you. I don't even know where to begin this other than to say, you know, you've been in this game for a long time. You're a pioneer, an icon in the integrative medicine space. And so much of what you're about, you were so far ahead of the curve. Like culture is only now even just beginning to catch up to so many of the things you were talking about in the late 60s, throughout the 70s, when you were kind of like this iconoclast. I guess in some cases you still maybe considered that. I don't know.
So.
I feel like you're welcomed, you know, now in a way that it probably didn't feel that way, you know, in the earlier stages of your career.
Well, if I cease being controversial, I think I'm not doing my job.
Right. There's a little bit of I'm interested in that spirit, right? Yeah. There's a little bit of a punk rock thing going on
definitely.
here because you've been pushing the envelope from day one, from what you were writing, you know, in the Crimson at Harvard and all the kind of stuff that dates back to you being in your like late teens and early 20s.
Definitely. And the first book that I wrote in 1972, The Natural Mind, you know, I think really I went back and read some parts of it, and it really predicts what's happening now with psychedelics and, you know, the positive change that this can bring to our society. But for a long time, you know, I've written and said the same thing really for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And for the early part of that time, nobody paid attention to me. And then I got a larger and larger following in the general public, but none of my medical colleagues paid any attention to me. And then that changed in the early 1990s. And now, you know, integrative medicine is becoming mainstream, and it's very gratifying to watch.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to feel like you've been vindicated. I mean, there's still so much work to be done, obviously.
But it feels like the culture has caught up with me in a lot of respects.
Right. So it must be challenging to check your ego a little bit with that, right? You're like, I've been screaming about this stuff forever.
Well, it seems so obvious to me, the things that I've been advocating, you know, talking about, you know, one of my main principles is that the body can heal itself. That's hardly news. I mean, that's Hippocrates said that in the 5th century BC. It's just that it hasn't been much paid attention to in modern medicine.
Yeah. Well, I feel like so much of your perspective was well informed by all the traveling that you did as a young person, right? Seeing parts of the world that were relatively inaccessible at the time to give you a broader perspective on different modalities of health and healing.
I had a wonderful opportunity that came my way by chance when I was 17. I won a scholarship to an experimental school that took a group of 22 students and 6 faculty people around the world for a year. And we lived with Native families. So I did this a year between high school and college. That changed my life. And I think traveling has been so important to me, and to be in other cultures and to see that there are other ways of interpreting reality, incredibly valuable. I think that's one of the problems I see in our society. You know, we're a big isolated country, and many people have no awareness of what's out there. I saw some statistic a few years ago that I think it was fewer than 40% of members of Congress had passports. I mean, amazing.
Really?
Yeah. And George W. Bush had never been out of the country when he became president. I mean, how is that possible? He was the son of a president, and he'd never been out of the country.
That does seem impossible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But I think there's no substitute for getting perspectives of other societies.
Yeah,
and other
I mean,
cultures.
the most interesting and introspective people that I know are people that are well-traveled, and particularly people that took the opportunity to travel when they were young and they're kind of, their minds were still being formed and they weren't calcified around their worldviews.
Yeah, and then after I finished my medical training, for a number of years, I traveled a lot in Latin America. I lived in Latin America for a number of years, studying plants and drugs and other ways of healing, and then also in Africa and Asia. And so that's just been very much a part of my life.
Yeah. Well, I'm obsessed with Harvard in the mid-'60s.
Yeah.
I just can't get enough of learning about what an interesting time it was in Cambridge with everybody from Richard Alpert to Timothy Leary, of course, Skinner, who I know you spent time with. It must have been. Was there a sense that it was special then?
Well, Harvard has always had a sense of being special. I remember there was a novel written by a faculty wife at Harvard called We Happy Few. So there was always this sense, that we were this elite. But, frankly, Harvard was getting passed by when the 60s revolution started. That was all going on in Berkeley and the West Coast. And it was a few years before it got to Harvard, and Harvard started to catch up with what was happening.
Did you have access to Leary and
I did.
Alpert
I had become interested in psychedelics. I'd read about them right before I entered Harvard as a freshman in 1960, and I asked about how I could find out about these, and I had a psychology professor who told me that there was these two guys in the social relations department who were starting to study these drugs. So I went over and met Leary at his office and had a conversation. This was about 1960 or 61, before he was just getting going on the studies he was doing. He was fascinating. He had a twinkle in his eye. He was he was a kind of Irish storyteller, very charming, and he genuinely thought that these were the most interesting things he'd ever come across, and he thought they had the potential to completely change society, and he had no sense that this was going to stir up any kind of opposition.
Yeah, it really was a culture clash, though, between the administration and these, wild-eyed professors who were, way out on a limb with some of the ideas they wanted to explore.
Well, one of the ideas that they wanted to explore was that everybody was playing games, and that there was the professor game and the university game. Well, the university didn't like hearing, that kind of stuff. So I think it was inevitable that there would be a big clash between them.
Right. And you then, began your experimental phase around that time as well.
Well, also, I had read Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, about mescaline. And by chance, he was at MIT in that fall semester that I entered Harvard, and he gave a series of lectures on visionary experience that were broadcast on the Harvard radio station. And I listened to them, and I wrote him a letter and asked him, where could I get mescaline? And he wrote back and gave me the name of a chemical company. And anyway, eventually I was able to get mescaline, and I experimented with it myself and with friends over the next few years. And that was, before almost anyone I knew had ever tried those substances.
Right. Do you know? You probably know Deborah Zekkeli.
Sure. Yeah, she's amazing.
She's
amazing.
incredible.
Yeah.
I spoke at Rancho La Puerta several years ago, and I had her on the podcast. But when I was there, I kind of dug into the history of that place and what I was starting to learn about Edmund, her late husband.
Pretty wild.
I mean, Huxley used to go down there, and it just sounded like a wild time at that moment.
And talk about healthy aging. I mean, she's one of the most incredible.
Now, 99?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Really, really impressive.
Yeah. I mean, so interesting how that intersection of experimentation with psychedelics with kind of this emergent wellness culture, in its infancy, to look back on that and to see kind of the fruits of that labor and the way the culture has kind of embraced these things now is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's taken a very long time, but I was just saying to someone yesterday that in the past few years, I was doing a lot of traveling and lecturing around the country and in other countries. And no matter what the subject was I was talking about, whether it was healthy aging, nutrition, the questions I would get asked would be about psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. That's what everyone wants to talk to you about.
Everyone wants to talk. And then I saw I think it was this month or last month, Vogue had a cover story on psilocybin mushrooms. Mm-hmm. I mean,
right.
that is mainstream.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's tricky for me. I mean, listen, just to preface what I'm going to say, I certainly acknowledge the tremendous amount of science that's occurring right now in terms of healing modalities with respect to PTSD and depression, and all the kind of clinical applications that we're discovering are appropriate for these substances. But I'm always challenged with how to square that with the fact that I'm a recovery guy. Like I've been in recovery for a long time.
Right.
And, within that, the construct of that community, it's a very binary thing. Like you don't use substances.
Sure.
I never used psychedelic substances. I acknowledge, these benefits that we're now seeing. Yep. It definitely fucks with my mind a little bit, because I think, should I try that? And I've got a friend who's like a longtime sober guy, like big book banger, like all the way in. And he went and did a supervised psilocybin experience with, I don't know, whoever like the kind of experts are in this field. And it was profound for him.
Well, these aren't really substances that you use in the way that people use alcohol or tobacco or cocaine. They're things that people may take on a single occasion and have some profound experience from them. My sense is that psychedelics, they can show you possibilities. They don't give you any information about how to maintain the possibilities. And then you have to work in other ways to find out how to extend and maintain that. So they're not really things that you incorporate into your daily life.
Right. Although, with the microdosing and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of that going on.
Sure.
I guess my only reticence around the conversation is that the more it gets talked about, the more mainstream the kind of acceptance of it is, the more likely it is that people will be using it in ways that they shouldn't be.
Sure, I think that's always a danger, and which is too bad, because I think the potential of them is really only realized. You mentioned set and setting at the beginning.
Right.
If people have the right expectations and use them in the right circumstances, and otherwise, I think you just fritter away their potential.
When you reflect back on those early experiences with psychedelics and kind of pair that with all the travel that you did, I mean, how do you think about the impact of that on the kind of broader perspective that you've brought to the health conversation?
Yeah, first of all, I don't use these things anymore. I mean, they were things that I used in the past, and on that book that I wrote, The Natural Mind, Alan Watts wrote a blurb for it, and one of the things he said was, that when you get the message, you can hang up the telephone, and I think that really applies to these experiences. So there's a lot of stuff I learned from them. I don't really feel the need to repeat those experiences, but one thing that I saw very powerfully is that what goes on in your mind really determines and shapes your experience of the external world. And I've applied that very much in my work with patients, because I just find over and over again that the root causes of illness are often in the mental, emotional sphere and not in the physical body, or they're in both. But conventional medicine has so ignored that non-physical part of ourselves, and I think that's a great limitation.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I appreciate about you the most is just that level of cognizance and emphasis that you put on the mind and your willingness to, delve deep into the nature of consciousness.
Yeah.
And these are just anathema in conventional medical practice.
Yeah, it just doesn't compute. I took one of the most interesting courses I ever took was in medical hypnosis at Columbia University. It was for physicians. I learned so many fascinating things there. And as a result of that, I made mind-body medicine a major component of the integrative medicine curriculum that I developed. And I very frequently refer patients to mind-body practitioners, whether that's hypnotherapists or visualization practitioners or any one of a number of other modalities, because I find these things to be incredibly effective, cost-effective, even fun for both practitioner and patient.
And relatively free of risk.
Totally. And they are so underutilized in medicine. And I remember once I was challenged to a public debate by Arnold Relman, who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. And it was a very publicized event. And I have never met a more closed-minded person. His position was, all you have to do is show me the evidence. You show me the evidence, blah, blah, blah. So anything you'd show him, he'd say, oh, well, that's not evidence. And one of the questions that I asked him, I said that, the best researched area of what I do is mind-body interactions. There's been 30 years of studies on that, and yet these modalities are so underutilized. What would you do to increase their use? And his response was, there is no evidence for mind-body interactions. So, I don't know what you can do with that.
Yeah, how are you? Yeah, there's a profound hubris around the scientific method. Science is truth, science is fact, but that overlooks the fact that it's not true. It's a method.
Yeah.
It's not a fact in and of itself. It's a means of approximating truth. It's a way to approach or discover truth, but it's also not the sole method, and it's flawed. And I think there's so much arrogance around this is the way that we do it. And that kind of approach is very dualistic or binary in that, it's controlling for this variable or this and that. And obviously we've made, I'm not dismissing it. It's like, this is the engine of progress, of course, but it overlooks the holistic nature of the human body and the interplay between all of these very sensitive systems.
And science and medicine in our part of the world are totally dominated by materialism, a philosophy that says that the only thing that's real is that which can be seen and touched and measured. And that if you see a change in a physical system, the cause has to be physical. Non-physical causation of physical events doesn't compute. It's not allowed for. So, in hypnosis, there's so many demonstrations, like you can touch a person with a finger and you have them believe it's a piece of red hot metal, and if they're in a deep trance, they get an actual blister. That is non-physical causation of a physical event. So, if you try to get a doctor to look at that, or a scientist, it's just a curious thing. It doesn't have any meaning.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of your interesting ideas around the placebo effect and the way that we kind of think about that backwards.
Fortunately, that's one of the things that's changing now, which makes me very happy. But the most common ways I hear the word placebo used are in phrases like, how do you know that's not just a placebo effect? And the most interesting word there is just, or we have to rule out the placebo effect. That's what we want to rule in. The placebo response is pure healing from within, mediated by the mind, unmixed up with the direct effects of treatment, which are likely to be harmful.
Yeah, I think I've heard you talk about the fact that in every kind of double-blind trial, if you look at the placebo group, there's always a few people that have experienced the result as if they had taken the medication. And that's the most interesting thing.
Amazing that any change we can produce with a pharmacological agent can be exactly mimicked in at least some people some of the time by a mind-mediated mechanism. So fortunately, the change that's happened, and this is the result of these new brain imaging technologies, is that now you can show that certain parts of the brain are active when people have placebo responses, and this makes it accessible, and real to people. So I think placebos are being taken much more seriously.
Right, because now the imaging science has caught up, and neuroscience has progressed to the point where they can provide an explanation that makes sense to the conventional kind of community.
And the same things happen with meditation. There have been a tremendous number of studies of very long time serious meditators showing different activity in different brain areas as a result. So the fact that a meditation practice can actually physically change the brain, I mean, that's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. But within that, there's this profound, deep appreciation for the mystical.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is like my favorite thing to talk about.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And I suspect that was in part informed by all these shamans and, various healing practitioners that you've experienced over the decades in South America and Asia, et cetera.
One of the attitudes that I just can't stand is that if when scientists believe that it's their job to make mystery go away, it seems to me mystery is an essential aspect of the universe, and that you have to appreciate that and wonder at it. Terence McKenna, I once heard say that the bigger you build the fire, the more you're aware of the extent of the darkness, and I think that's true. And I think that our experience, at the heart of our experience, is mystery. That's stuff that we can appreciate, but we can't really understand with our mind.
Right. So how do you get a typical doctor to develop a broader appreciation for that? It's like how does that work? That's kind of at the crux of your whole thing.
Well, I train doctors. At the center I have at the University of Arizona, this is what we do. We're the world leaders in integrative medical education, and we train doctors and nurse practitioners and medical students and residents. And our main training is a 2-year intensive fellowship. We've now graduated over 2,000 physicians from that in all specialties, all ages. And it's all the things they should have learned in medical school but didn't, including like healing and the fact the body can heal itself and so forth. So the people who come are self-selected. And what's happening today is that so many people in medicine are just burned out. They're so disillusioned at what medicine has become, and they know there's got to be a different way. And so they come to us, and there's a new generation out there, I think, that gets it in a different way. There was a social club that I belonged to at Harvard Medical School that had a motto that I always really liked. It was, "We dress the wound, God heals it." And that's acknowledging the that aspect of things.
Yeah. I mean, on the surface, obviously, you cut your hand or whatever, you can watch it heal.
Right.
Like there is something going on that you don't need to really attend to. The body will take care of
itself.
But beyond that, we don't really appreciate the extent to which the body is constantly doing that.
Yeah, and I find in my work, one of the things that I have to do is try to instill greater confidence in people about their body's ability to take care of things. Most people have no awareness of that and think they've got to run off for help, as the first thing.
Right, and what's interesting is that these are things that have, been paramount in all kinds of modalities dating back through history that we're very dismissive of, from Ayurveda to Chinese medicine and all. I mean, now I feel like we're kind of looking at those things with an appropriate level of reverence and critique to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Exactly.
But these are not new ideas.
Yeah, hardly.
I mean, you've been in it for 50 years, but this has been going on for thousands of years.
Yeah, it bugs me when I hear doctors refer to what they're doing as traditional medicine. To me, traditional medicine is Chinese medicine, Native American medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, things that are thousands of years old. I mean, our system of medicine in its present form is maybe 100 years old, 120 at the most.
Yeah.
It doesn't go back very far.
But it's packed into that is a certain level of arrogance and this idea that we're always at the pinnacle of human understanding. Yeah. And, you don't understand because we have this training and we're going to tell you what to do. That's starting to shift right now. But that arrogance, that hubris becomes a bar to having a growth mindset or an openness to other ideas.
Yeah, very well put.
Yeah.
And to me, the essence of science is open-minded observation.
Right.
That's where you start.
I've been rewatching The Knick. Did you watch The Knick?
I did, yeah.
The Knick is like the greatest thing on television. It's unbelievable how good this show is. And for those that don't know, it's about Clive Owen plays this surgeon in 1900. Thackeray, he's full of vim and vigor and ego and arrogance. And on some level, he is a genius, but he's on the edge. He's a fanatical cocaine addict and opium addict. But he kind of rules the roost in the NIC, this hospital. And what I didn't realize until I looked into it a little bit more deeply is that he's based on William Stewart Halstead. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Right, who has kind of a similar trajectory, having been a cocaine addict, and the guy who kind of set in motion this residency program that is a legacy today of residents working insane hours.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was dictated because the guy was like on cocaine all the time.
Right.
And he could like work around the clock. But I'm bringing it up because that arrogance, right? He's like, I'm the guy who's in charge. I know all. And when you look back on it, it's comedic because he's giving people turpentine and soaking their feet in mercury and doing all kinds of crazy stuff that's just, preposterous. But it makes you think, like 100 years from now, what are we going to look back on at what we're doing in this moment and realize how insane it is?
I gave an invited lecture a few years ago that I called What Were We Thinking? And I looked at examples in the past 50 years of practices that now we look back on and can't believe we did them, but leaving people with a question of what are we doing now that 50 years from now we look back the same way. So some of them were, one is there were fluoroscopes in shoe stores when I was growing up to check the fit of shoes. So, there was this big console and you'd stick your feet with your new shoes under them and there was a big glowing green screen and you'd see the bones of your feet. And the game as a kid was to distract your parents and the shoe salesman so you could spend as much time under there as possible. I mean, unbelievable.
Well, like an X-ray?
Yeah, like an X-ray in shoe stores. Right. So another one was... this is much worse. There was the thymus behind the breastbone is the master gland of the immune system. It's where immune cells go to be trained to recognize antigens and foreign things. And it's very active in childhood and adolescence, and it shrinks in adolescence. When I was in medical school, nobody knew what the thymus did. It was considered a functionless organ, a vestigial organ. And first of all, that's arrogance, right? That you don't know what the function of something in the body is, so you say it has no function. And then the next step is that allows you then to destroy it or take it out. So doctors in this was in the 1950s, invented a disease that every child had called thymic hypertrophy, meaning the thymus is too large, treatable by bombarding it with X-rays, which causes it to shrink immediately. I had a good friend who was a graduate in my undergraduate class, and then he went to Harvard Law School. He was clerking for a Supreme Court clerk, and he got a letter one day from Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, a very good hospital in Chicago, saying, our records show that as a child, you were taken to our clinic for a course of X-rays directed at your thymus, and we're now finding that people that had this treatment are developing thyroid cancer at unusual rates, and they urged him to come in and get checked. He didn't even know this had been done to him. But I mean, unbelievable, that kind of arrogance.
Yeah. When I think about the traditional modalities around healthcare, one thing I'm pretty certain we're not going to look kindly on years from now is the myopic perspective on lifestyle, diet, nutrition, all of these things that are the key contributors to the real epidemics of our time, which are the chronic lifestyle illnesses that are killing more people than anything else right now. And the over-medication of everybody, the treatment of symptoms, the inability to really get to the underlying causes and to, address those in a meaningful way.
A major component of integrative medicine is lifestyle medicine. And I think that puts us in a really strong position to offer real preventive advice to people. The total instruction I got in nutrition in 4 years at Harvard Medical School was 30 minutes, which were grudgingly...
It hasn't changed much.
No, it hasn't changed much. And when nutrition is taught, it's taught as biochemistry, which is forgotten as soon as the biochemistry exams are over. So, I think most doctors are functionally illiterate in nutrition unless they've made an effort to learn it on their own, which is not so easy to do.
Yeah. Well, systemically, the education is not about preventing disease or the promotion of well-being. It's about the treatment of disease.
In fact, that was one of my motivations for getting out and learning other methods was I had learned nothing about health and healing in my medical studies. I hardly ever heard the word healing used. And it always seemed to me my main job was to teach people how not to get sick in the first place. And I hadn't learned how to do that.
So let's define integrative medicine.
Well, the short definition is it's the intelligent combination of conventional medicine and natural and preventive medicine and selected use of alternative therapies. But I think, the fuller definition is it's a system that really focuses on the body's ability to heal itself, that looks at people as whole persons, not just physical bodies, that takes all aspects of lifestyle into account, that values the practitioner-patient relationship and makes use of all available treatments, no matter where they come from, as long as they're not going to hurt people and show reasonable evidence of efficacy.
And how does that differ from functional medicine?
Functional medicine, there's some overlap between functional medicine and integrative medicine, but I think they're quite different. I think that functional medicine is very focused on biochemical mechanisms. I think overly focused on that. And some of those biochemical mechanisms, I think, may not have great clinical relevance. And then in practice, the treatment is correcting these functional biochemical disturbances by recommending a lot of supplements to take. I think that functional medicine has much less emphasis on mind-body medicine, on spirituality in medicine, on the community aspects of medicine. So I personally think that integrative medicine is a more comprehensive, more robust system.
So in the training of this next generation of integrative medicine practitioners, the challenge, there's a lot of challenges, but not the least of which is what is the business model? Because you're butting up against a conventional system that's driven by, insurance reimbursements.
By profit.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. As dysfunctional as our healthcare system is, and it's very dysfunctional, it's generating rivers of money. And that money is flowing into very few pockets. It's the pockets of the big pharmaceutical companies, the manufacturers of medical devices, the big insurers, and the big healthcare, corporations. And those vested interests don't want anything to change. They're making out like bandits. And I feel bad. We train the people that come to us, really highly, and then we turn them out in the world where everything's stacked against them. The priorities of reimbursement are backward. We don't pay a doctor to sit with a patient and teach a breathing exercise. We pay a doctor to prescribe drugs, and often when the doctor doesn't think those are necessary, or to do tests. We don't reimburse for lifestyle counseling.
Right.
So that all has to change.
Yeah. There has been some progress. I know Dean Ornish recently got insurance reimbursement for some of his programs.
Yeah.
But that's the key, right? You've got to get insurance on board with this.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it doesn't make financial sense, especially when a big part of this is follow-up and outreach and accountability, where you have, kind of other practitioners in your office who are checking in on everybody and making sure that they're staying on track, because you can't just say you need to go, here's the diet you need, or here's the exercise routine, and expect people to actually follow that unless they feel, that there's some kind of program or emotional connection to it.
Totally. And I think the challenge is that we have to be able to generate data that we can take the people who pay for healthcare to show them that it's in their interest to pay for these kinds of interventions.
Right. Ultimately, it's if you keep these people from getting diabetes and becoming obese, it's going to be a far less strain on the insurance, mechanism.
But apropos of that, I remember seeing a few years ago, there was a week-long series in the New York Times about the impact of the type 2 diabetes epidemic in New York City. And one of the articles pointed out that for every preventive nutritional counseling session that a diabetes center did in New York, that the center lost, I think on average, something like $50 to $70. For every amputation of a diabetic limb, they made $6,000.
Right. So it's a misalignment of incentives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that I mean, that's a systemic change. It's great to train these doctors and put them out in the world. And I believe that anybody, maybe not all people, but most people who go to medical school are well-intentioned. They want to help people.
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of the people that come to us for training say that this has really restored why they went into medicine in the first place.
Yeah, because there's so much disillusionment.
Tremendous.
With doctors
and that's a huge change. When I was in medical school, medicine looked like a very desirable profession. Doctors had great status in society, but I think one of the great promises was that it offered you autonomy. You could be your own boss. No longer. I mean, doctors cannot make it in solo practice anymore. You have to work for a corporation that tells you how many patients you have to see an hour, that tells you what you can do and not do in the way of recommending treatments. That's all changed. I can't tell you how many doctors I've met in the past few years who say they wish they'd gone into another
I would imagine they have to become pretty leveraged with debt also for all the equipment.
Huge problem.
The
and also
expenses.
just the debt from medical school that many of them are still trying to pay off when they're in their 40s.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar from the chicken farmer who's really working for Tyson or, you know what I mean? And they're basically servicing debt and they become indentured to a system that is so sort of rigid in its structure.
Yeah, true.
Sorry to interrupt the flow. We'll be right back with more awesome, but I want to snag a moment to talk to you about the importance of nutrition. The thing is, most people I know actually already know how to eat better and aspire to incorporate more whole plants, more fruits, vegetables, seeds, beans, and legumes into their daily routine. Sadly, however, without the kitchen tools and support, very few end up sticking with it. So, because adopting a plant-based diet transformed my life so profoundly, and because I want everybody to experience some version of what I've experienced, we decided to tackle and solve this very common problem. The solution we've devised, I'm proud to say, is the Plant Power Meal Planner, our affordable, all-in-one digital platform that sets you up for nutrition excellence by providing access to thousands of highly customizable, super delicious, and easy to prepare plant-based recipes. Everything integrates with automatic grocery delivery, and you get access to our amazing team of nutrition coaches 7 days a week and many other features. To learn more and to sign up, visit meals.richroll.com. And right now, for a limited time, we're offering $10 off an annual membership when you use the promo code RRHealth at checkout. This is life-changing stuff, people, for just $1.70 a week, literally the price of a cup of coffee. Again, that's meals.richroll.com, promo code RRHealth for $10 off an annual membership. All right, let's get back to the show. Of all the kind of shamanistic, alternative healing practitioners that you've, encountered over the years, like how do you parse someone who's got the goods from the charlatans?
I have a good bullshit detector.
Good.
And some of that was refined actually by going through Harvard Medical School. I'm very glad I had that education. Right. It gives me a standard against which, to judge stuff. Frankly, when I was in South America, a number of shamans that I saw were drunks. They were completely nothing for me to learn from. I would say the mentor that I most value is the one that I learned that breathing technique from, who was an elderly osteopathic physician, Robert Fulford. I met him when he was in the early 80s. He'd come to Tucson to retire. He used only hands-on manipulation. He's the best healer I've ever seen. He placed great emphasis on the breath. The manipulative technique he did was very gentle. He had huge hands. It was great to be worked on by him. And, he'd do a treatment and then people would say, when should I come back? And he would say, you don't have to come back. You're fixed.
Right.
And he would do these things and say, I made these adjustments and now let old Mother Nature do her work. And I saw remarkable cures in his office just from this simple. I mean, he was a healer, but he had a method that also worked.
So what do you make of that? Like, what is going on?
I think, first of all, he was a charismatic healer. There was something special about him. But he also was very talented. He had trained himself. He had incredible sensitivity of his hands. And what he taught made a great deal of sense. For example, he was incredibly effective at ending recurrent cycles of otitis media, ear infections in kids. Mm-hmm. And in conventional medicine, this is treated with cycles of antibiotics. And eventually, if they don't work, they put tubes in the ears. He said that the root cause of the problem was improper breathing, and that breathing was the mechanical force that pumped the lymphatic circulation. And if that wasn't working properly, there was stagnant fluid buildup in the middle ear, which provided a breeding ground for bacteria. And he said you could wipe out the bacteria all you wanted with antibiotics, but if you didn't change that underlying problem, the infections would come back, which is what our experience is. He would do one treatment, of manipulation. You'd see the kid's chest expanding more fully when he finished, and they'd never have another ear infection.
Wow.
I mean, amazing. And I tried for several years to get one pediatrician in Tucson to come down to his office and watch, and nobody would come. And that's the attitude I can't stand. But I finally got an English woman who was a pediatrician who came, and she eventually sent in patients, and she said she'd never seen anything like that. And I made a little documentary film of him. But he was really inspiring. And when I was working with him, he charged $35 for a visit. Right. He had no equipment.
Right. And he in Tucson, right?
Yeah.
After you traveled all over South America.
Yes, exactly. That was perfect also, right. That's the Wizard of Oz phenomenon, right? That was right in my backyard, and I'd never known it was there to begin with.
Yeah, it's interesting how we try to wrap our heads around things that we don't understand, and our resistance to these outside ideas, and how it takes time. Like now, we have, I'm sure you're familiar with Wim Hof and all the stuff that he's doing with breath. And for some reason, perhaps in part due to his charisma, and the fact that he's sharing so much on social media, there seems to be a conversation around breath and the autonomic nervous system. And what I kind of gather from everything that he does, all of which is rooted in pranayama and like ancient yogic breathing techniques, is this idea that we have more control over these systems that we just believe are running automatically within us, that we can actually manipulate them.
Right. And breath, I think, is the key to that, because it's the only function you can do completely consciously or completely unconsciously. And the theory of breath work and pranayama is that by using your conscious system to impose rhythms on the breath, you gradually induce those rhythms in the involuntary system, and thereby you get to the autonomic nervous system and can change its function. That's such a simple idea, and it's something that's been paid so little attention to in the West. So it's great to see this coming.
Yeah, now he's like being studied and all this stuff. And the cold exposure is what gets all the attention, but it's really the breath.
I think it's really the breath. I mean, I think the cold stuff is great. I have, partly as a result of meeting him and listening to that, I spend summers in British Columbia on an island. The ocean's pretty cold there, and I go in every day. And I've gotten to like that, and I like cold dips and cold things. I think that's good.
Yeah, and that's cold.
That's cold.
Yeah.
But I think, as you say, absolutely the breath is the key. And it's wonderful suddenly to see interest in this. There's books that have started to come out on breath, suddenly being taken somewhat seriously.
Right.
It was
so
James
ignored. Nestor's book.
James Nestor's book, which is good.
Yeah. What about these stories that you hear about, sadhus and caves in the Himalayas who are breatharians and haven't eaten food for decades?
Well,
it's like, is this apocryphal? Have you ever met any of those guys?
No, I'm an open-minded skeptic.
And I want to hear, where's the line?
Okay, so for me, I'm willing to believe anything, but then I got to see evidence for it.
Right.
But that's different from being a closed-minded skeptic, which is what a lot of people I meet in medicine are. That they have a mindset not to believe from the beginning. No, I've never met a breatharian. There was one famous guy in Los Angeles who had a big following, and was caught on videotape stuffing himself with candy bars in a 7-Eleven.
Of course.
Yeah,
right.
so I don't know. That I haven't seen. However, I've seen enough stuff that make me, I'm willing to believe.
Right.
Wim Hof, his methods were, he got a lot of that from Tibetan practice, and those people that, can warm themselves to an incredible degree in dry blankets sitting out on a frozen shore of a frozen lake. I mean, sure, I've seen that. I've done fire walking myself, and very impressed with that. I did it the wrong way several times, and then I did it, the right way. I did one with Tony Robbins when he was trying to set a world record for the longest fire walk. It was 40 feet over a very hot bed of coals, and I had on a much shorter, cooler walk. I burned my feet, but when I did that one, I was in the right state of mind, and there was no sensation of heat. I walked slowly. I could dig my feet into the hot coals. I had nothing. I got really high. Amazing. I mean, that was totally where my mind was at the time.
Yeah, and he's taken thousands of people through that successfully. So what is how do you explain that?
Well, I think if you're, all right, this is just guess, right? And then it's also based on some of my psychedelic experiences. I think if the mind gets out of the way, it can leave the nervous system free to allow the body to interact with external things in ways that it's very precise and balanced. For example, one of the experiences I have had repeatedly is in a psychedelic state, walking barefoot over sharp stones, which I normally couldn't do because it hurt too much. But not only did it not hurt, there were no dents in my foot. So that's the interesting aspect, what's going on there. And it feels to me as if my mind is not interfering, that the muscles on the surface of the foot can push back very precisely to neutralize the force at the surface of the skin. And that's like some ability that we have, which we normally don't see because our mind is somehow not letting that happen.
Yeah, you have this other story about doing yoga and being unable to do reverse crow or whatever it was, and then dropping acid or psilocybin
and then
or what
suddenly
it was, and then being able to do it.
Right, but then when it wore off, I couldn't do it again.
Right.
But having seen that I could do it, I was motivated to practice until I was able to do it.
It's getting the mind out of the way. Or quieting the mind.
Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes a conversation around how do you do that without exogenous substances, right?
Well, I think obviously it's possible. With Tony Robbins and that firewalk, I wasn't taking anything. It was the group energy that he created that caused the change.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's impossible to not develop a deeper appreciation for just how powerful the mind is. And then it becomes even more inexcusable, in my perspective, from the lack of appreciation for that in mental health, in the mental health space, where we're just over medicating people like crazy, especially kids. The extent to which
this
we're
is a
prescribing SSRIs
experiment being done with kids.
These drugs for ADHD and everything like that.
We have no idea what these do to the developing brain. It's ironic that the word psychiatry comes from Greek. It means soul doctoring. What a great concept. But it's ironic that of all the medical specialties, psychiatry is the one that's become most mired in materialism. The dogma is that all disordered thinking and emotion is the result of disordered brain biochemistry. And the only way to deal with that is by giving pharmaceuticals to change that. And if that were right, if that were true, we would be much more effective at dealing with mental illness.
Yeah, they don't seem to work very well.
No, that's a very good observation. If you look at psychiatry journals and look at the ads for the pharmaceuticals, you would think that depression, anxiety, that these would be things of the past. It's not so. They are not very effective, these methods.
Yeah, I also think that there's something going on culturally where we've been lulled into this belief that we should never be anything but happy.
Exactly.
Right? You wrote a whole book about this.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Like if I'm not feeling good today, like the first impulse is to
I don't have enough serotonin in
my
my brain, so I better take something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great mistake. We're not supposed to be happy all the time.
Right. So beyond breath, what are other practice? I'm sure there are
it's all
certain
the things
people
It's like physical activity is one of the most powerful ways of stabilizing mood. Nutrition has an enormous effect on brain function and mood. I think who you associate with, moods are contagious. If you spend time in the company of people who are depressed and anxious, you're more likely to be depressed and anxious.
Yeah.
I mean, there's actual research showing that if you have a happy friend who lives within a half mile of you, you are more likely to be happy. And the effect falls off with distance. You can actually measure this. So, and many people, that's something I tell people to do. Many people have never think about that.
Yeah. Well, a big piece of that is this loss of community that I think is endemic to modern culture.
And especially acute right now during the pandemic.
Of course. Right. I'm sure are you friends with Dan Buettner?
Yeah.
You know Dan?
Yeah.
Dan's coming over here tomorrow.
Oh, great. Tell him hi.
But, one of the many things I appreciate about his work is that he understands that you can't shoulder the individual with trying to, solve all these problems on their own. We have to reimagine how we construct communities to make these things just, in the background so that they're the easy choices, whether it's bike lanes or access to healthy food or, neighborhoods organized so that community is inevitable.
Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
that's part and parcel of the integrative medicine message, right?
Yes.
Like those two worlds should merge with each other in some way.
We place a great deal of emphasis on community and the importance of community to healing and health. Absolutely.
Another thing that must strike you as kind of amazing is the kind of recent appreciation for mushrooms, non-psychoactive mushrooms. Like everyone's drinking mushroom coffee.
I know.
We're all talking about healthy mushrooms, and and this is something that you've been talking about forever.
Yeah, I was fascinated from mushrooms from an early age. I think partly because my mother was very afraid of them, and she told me when mushrooms came up on our lawn that I shouldn't even touch them because I could get poisoned, and somehow that made me want to, I want to know about them. They seemed strange and interesting, and actually throughout history, I think people have found mushrooms strange. That it's unclear. They didn't grow from roots like plants, and they would suddenly appear from one day to the next. And, they're strange colors and odors and tastes, and some of them are utterly delicious, and there's some that can kill you. And now we found all of these that have interesting medicinal effects. They're really unusual, interesting life forms. And as you may have heard, we are more closely related to mushrooms than we are to plants.
Yeah, that's a mind blower.
Yeah.
And the extent to which the underground invisible network is a communication network that basically plays this massive role in the entire ecosystem.
Exactly. I mean, I remember learning, this must have been in the 70s or 80s, and I had no idea this, that trees in the forest could not live unless they formed symbiotic associations with mushrooms. That the rootlets of trees actually become sheathed with the mycelium of mushrooms. And if you take tree seedlings and sterilize the roots and plant them, the trees are completely stunted and don't grow normally. I mean, I had studied biology at Harvard. I never heard of that.
Yeah, that's wild.
A completely new idea.
Yeah, and now, Paul Stamets is the guy that everyone wants to talk to about this, but you're the guy who introduced him to this whole thing, which is crazy. I think I read that in Michael Pollan's book.
Yeah, I got him interested, especially in medicinal mushrooms, because he was only interested in the magic ones when I met him when he was a young guy.
Right. So of all the mushrooms, like what are the ones that you feel like we should be incorporating into our routine?
Oh gosh, I think it's probably best to incorporate a number of different species at the same time because they seem to work synergistically. I think reishi, which has good anti-inflammatory effect, maitake mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, shiitake. A lot of these are the ones that have immune modulating effects that increase our resistance to infection and cancer. Very useful. Lion's mane, which is now being cultivated wild. It's a very good edible mushroom, but this has a unique nerve growth factor. Appears to improve cognitive function, may help ward off dementia. I think that's a really good one to know about. Chaga, which is another one of these shelf fungi that grow in trees. How about cordyceps? Is that
that's
one
my favorite?
With? Okay, thought you would be.
It works as an endurance booster in terms of how it helps you sort of maximize oxygen uptake. Like it's very effective.
So this is a strange one. It's a parasitic mushroom that grows on caterpillar larvae.
Yeah, it grows on it's a fungus that grows on the back of a caterpillar. At very high altitude.
Yeah, and that kills the caterpillar and then sends up this fruiting stalk. Although in practice now it's cultivated on grain. This has a long history of use in traditional Chinese medicine for people who are debilitated, either from injury or illness or old age, of increasing energy. And there's been good studies showing increases aerobic capacity. So that's a good tasting mushroom, and it's a good one to know about.
Yeah, the more you learn about this, you realize just how mystical and magical it is. It's insane.
I love mystical and magical.
Yeah.
That's your
thing, man. Right?
Yes.
Where does the interest in matcha come in? Is that when you traveled to Japan?
Yeah, I went to Japan first when I was 17. I was on part of that when I was in that round the world student exchange program, and I lived with Japanese families. First one was outside of Tokyo. This was 1959 when Japan was a very different place. And the family that I lived with, there was supposed to be a student there that was studying English, but we had no language in common. But the second night I was there, the mother of the family indicated she wanted to take me next door to her neighbor who was a practitioner of tea ceremony. And so the three of us sat around and this woman made matcha. And first of all, I was blown away by the color of matcha. I'd never seen that vibrant green was just amazing. And then also the bamboo whisk that's used to whisk matcha in a bowl. It's just a marvel of Japanese craftsmanship I was fascinated with. So in the 1970s, I was going to Japan fairly regularly, and whenever I'd go, I'd bring matcha back and turn people onto it. Nobody that I knew had ever experienced it or knew anything about it. And somewhere in I think it was in the late 1980s, 1990s, I tried to sell matcha through my website. I imported it. I found a company that I could get it from in Japan, but it was way ahead of its time, so people weren't ready for it. And then, I was amazed to see matcha becoming popular.
Just one of the many things.
One of the many things that I was way ahead of.
Right.
However, I was very disappointed that most of the matcha that I saw here was really inferior because matcha it's such a fine powder that it oxidizes really quickly. And when it oxidizes, it loses that bright green color. It becomes bitter. It's not pleasant. And most of what I saw available here was that way. So I was determined to see if I could make really good matcha available. So I founded a company, managed to get the URL matcha.com, which is a big score.
Yeah, that is.
And made a connection with a traditional matcha producer in Japan. And we import and sell, I think, some of the best matcha you can get. Yeah. And by the way, we can offer, I can offer your listeners a discount.
Oh, cool.
So it's matcha.com is the company's Matchakari. And if they use the discount code RICH15,
all right,
they will get a
discount.
That's
very generous. Thank you.
Matcha. But matcha's, it's the only form of tea in which you consume the whole leaf, and it's got a higher content of antioxidants and flavor compounds and other healthful compounds. And some of this is because of the unusual way that the leaves are grown. In the last 3 weeks before harvest, they're grown under a very heavy shade cloth, 90% shade cloth. And in response to that, absence of light, the leaves grow bigger and thinner and produce more chlorophyll, which is why it's so bright green,
Right.
and more L-theanine, which is the calming compound that moderates the caffeine, and antioxidants and other good things. So I think for all those reasons, matcha is one of the most healthful forms of tea out there.
Yeah, I love it. It does give you a little bit of a boost, but it's kind of a calm energy, and
Exactly.
it sustains itself
Very
a little
different
bit
from
longer.
coffee.
And the color is magical.
It's magical.
Yeah.
I love it.
Tastes great. But I know well the difference between a fine matcha and what you typically see. It's a much darker color. You can tell it's
Darker or
been,
yellowish.
you could tell, yeah, you could tell it's been oxidized. And I see this with a lot of these, quote unquote, superfood products. The more money there is to be made, with the lack of kind of quality control or regulation in this space, you go, whether it's moringa or, whatever it is, camu camu, whatever you're trying to get, it's really hard to know, like, what's the good stuff and what's, been,
and if you've had no experience of the good stuff, you don't know.
Right. And you don't know how it's harvested, how
Right.
it's grown, how it's picked, how it's stored, how it's
all
shipped.
that.
All of those things play into whether or not it's maintaining, the qualities that you're purchasing it for. And most of these products are not good for that reason.
Exactly. By the way, I get a little disillusioned with all the talk about superfoods because we have plenty of superfoods right here. Like berries are superfoods, and you can get very good quality organic berries that are just loaded with antioxidants and anti-cancer compounds. Those are superfoods.
Right. Going all the way back to the botany days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How many people were in the botany department at Harvard?
It was an attic of the university. First of all, it was the Botanical Museum.
What?
Yeah, really. It was biology was being completely taken over by molecular biology and gene stuff at that point, and botany was a little annex that was considered so antiquated.
Yeah.
And it was in the Botanical Museum, which was above the glass flowers and the
in the Gregory
building.
Mendel wing or
Exactly,
something.
right. But my professor Dick Schultes was the father of modern ethnobotany, and that was just a wonderful association that I formed with him. And having that background in botany has been invaluable to me. I know very few physicians who studied botany.
Yeah.
And it was a shock to me when I went to medical school to see that the people teaching me pharmacology generally had no firsthand knowledge of the plants that these drugs came from. And to see how different the whole plants were from the chemicals isolated from them. So that's given me a great perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, no surprise given that the idea that nutrition in and of itself really had no value in terms of, how the organism operates.
Yeah.
So, but that's changing. I love all the new science that's coming out about the microbiome.
That's fantastic.
And,
that is such a revolution.
And that's as fascinating as the mushroom kingdom.
Absolutely.
And is mysterious, I think.
Yeah. When I was in medical school, the teaching was that, yes, there were these organisms in the colon and they helped with digestion, but that was it.
Yeah.
And that people who took acidophilus or ate yogurt were health nuts.
Right.
And, boy, has that changed.
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's changed a lot. Well, I'm a longtime plant-based vegan person.
Yes, I know.
I know you're not vegan, but somebody who appreciates the plant kingdom perhaps
Very
as much. As anybody. So I love talking about plants.
Can I just say also, I love talking about plants. I love plants. I garden a lot. I have lots of plants around me all the time. But, one of the reasons that I would love to see people move in the direction of eating more plants and reduce consumption of animals, that this is a very concrete thing that we could do to deal with one of the factors that's driving these zoonotic diseases that are responsible for this pandemic and which are putting us at great risk for future pandemics of very serious diseases. It's that we are encouraging organisms to jump from animals to people because of climate change, deforestation, our methods of agriculture. And you look at the ones, what are we going to do something about? One of them, very concretely, is to reduce our dependence on animals for food. If there was just less of that, that would put us ahead of the game.
Yeah, 100%. In the way that we need to appreciate the human body and its ability to heal and self-regulate, we need to own that perspective with respect to the planet, right?
For sure.
And if we're clearing rainforests and creating algal blooms in our waterways, we're devastating ecosystems, and we're creating less and less areas for these species to exist in the manner in which they're meant to exist, and so they end up encroaching on other areas, and these species are coming into contact that perhaps wouldn't otherwise, and all of this creates this toxic situation that leads to zoonotic disease and the decay of the planet. And a very simple, practical, and effective thing that we can all do as individuals is reduce that meat intake. Yeah. You still like the fish, though?
I still like fish. I'll tell you, I became a lacto-vegetarian in 1970. And I ate that way for about 15 years. And then I was going to Japan frequently. It is very difficult to go to Japan and not eat fish because fish are in everything. And then I was reading about health benefits of fish. So I started eating fish. And, since then I've been a pescatarian.
But you're not going to Japan right now.
That's correct.
Come on. I know Sylvia Earle was all over you, right?
She was all over me. She begged me to tell people not to eat fish.
Did you watch Seaspiracy?
Sure.
On Netflix?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's great in that movie.
She's great. And it's a big problem. There aren't going to be fish in the oceans from the way that we've over-harvested them. I'm
gonna convert you back to being a
all right,
vegan.
you can work on it. How do you feel about lab-grown meat or lab-grown fish?
I think it's interesting. Look, we can have a discussion on the margins about the health implications of that, but I think we need to focus on the elephant in the room, which is the extent to which our dependence on industrialized animal agriculture is wreaking havoc on the planet. Yeah. We are a meat-obsessed world, and that has to change if we want to preserve our ecosystems. This is one tool in a toolkit for accomplishing that.
Yep. I agree. And I would say I would tell people in this country that the place to start is with beef, because I think that's the one that has the worst consequences.
Yeah. There's also issues of antibiotic resistance, and it's a toxic stew of so many problems that we could redress if we just reduce that dependency on it. So whether you go 100% plant-based or 90% plant-based, or you start, just making some simple changes in your diet on a daily basis, like these things are important to do and to take seriously, I think. Yep. So you still like a little cheese, though. Right? You know what I did? My wife is a plant-based cheese wizard, and she started this company called Shrimu. She's really come up with the next evolution of cheese. So I brought you some samples.
Oh, I'd love to try that
afterwards.
Be very interested to do that. I'm also very interested in new mycoprotein foods that are, being developed from cultivating fungi and mushrooms.
Right. There's this weird intersection of the science catching up with, sort of hard science catching up with food science to create interesting products out of everything from algae to mushrooms and all this kind of thing.
Are your kids vegan?
They are, but they're now at the age where they need to have their own exploration. Yeah. So we give them a wide leash. I mean, they stray from the hardcore vegan path, but they've never had meat. Mm-hmm. So they'll have, but they'll my teenage daughter, she wants to have a Beyond Burger and stuff like that, Wow. She wants to have some junk food. It's okay. It's like I'm less interested in that than I am in, where her or all of my kids' diet is going to be 5-10 years from now. And we've just tried to instill in them, a certain level of education. So it's less about the day-to-day and more about in general kind of where they fall. But it's tricky with people with food, right?
I know.
You've been doing this for a long time. Trying to get people to change their habits.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right.
Is there anything harder than that?
Right. Well,
How do you approach that when?
Well, I usually tell people, not to try to make global change, but to do it in small pieces. Like start by, the most important thing is to start by not eating refined, processed, and manufactured food. That's the main step that I would urge.
Yeah. If we could just do that, imagine
that would put us very
how
far
different
ahead.
The world would be.
And another one is we're in such a nutritional mess in this country, it's hard to know where to start. But the other place I'd start is to get people to not drink sweet liquids. If you could just, and it's not just, it's not just sodas, it's fruit juice and energy drinks and putting sugar in coffee and tea and all that.
Yeah.
That would be a big step.
Yeah. And we got to do something about these farm subsidies, I think. Again, it goes back to a misalignment of incentives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is backward.
Right.
We've made the unhealthiest food cheapest and most available, and people eat what's cheap and what's available.
Yeah. Extending that thought in thinking about the disastrous state of healthcare, if you were, if you had your druthers, like how would you address healthcare reform?
Well, first of all, we don't have a healthcare system in this country. We have a disease management system that's functioning very imperfectly and getting worse by the minute. We have to have universal healthcare. It's unconscionable that the richest nation on earth can't guarantee basic healthcare to all of its citizens.
You're socialist.
Yeah, well, there you go. I think there should be a universal income too.
Yeah.
Then I think we have to really break the hold of those vested interests on the system. I really see we have to get away from dependence on expensive technology for managing conditions. In terms of shifting the whole enterprise away from disease management to health promotion, the problem is you run up against those vested interests again. It's whether one example is the farm subsidies. There's last I looked, something like 46% of U.S. hospitals had fast food restaurants in their premises, and if you try to change that, this brings money to the hospital.
Yeah.
It's like almost everywhere you look, it's like you're up against that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, in the way that the human body and the planet are holistic organisms, politics is a whole. You can't talk about healthcare reform without talking about election reform and campaign finance reform, because it's the lobbying,
Yes, so
industrial complex
there has
creates
to be
these things.
A grassroots social political movement in which we start electing different kinds of representatives who aren't beholden to those vested interests. I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Who do you think is getting it right? Like, overseas, Finland? Like these
I
other
think
countries?
Germany and Australia do better. They both have two-tiered systems where there's government insurance and there's also private insurance. They seem to work somewhat better. But most of the countries, you look at the UK, Japan, that had very well-functioning national health systems, they're broken down for the same reasons. It's an aging population, epidemics of lifestyle-related diseases, dependence on expensive technology. We're, I think, farther over the cliff than other. I don't see anybody that's got it right.
Yeah. When you look at culture right now with the internet, it's all about subscription services, whether it's Netflix or the New York Times. And I've often thought, like, healthcare should be, I would subscribe to a service that was some hybrid of being able to visit practitioners in person and do digital, online stuff. That's an
interesting idea,
where I could get my blood work done and I could consult about, diet and nutrition and all these things. And ultimately, if you develop every week we check in or something like that,
right?
The insurance company covering that, it seems like a leap, but they're not going to then have to pay for dialysis or all these other things.
Well, that's what I mean. You got to show
road.
them that's in their interest that you're going to save them money by this.
Yeah. But it's so radical compared to the way that we're doing it now. But
we're going to be forced to change because this is unsustainable the way it's going.
Are you optimistic about that?
I think the system's going to crash. We're spending something like 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare, and we have worse health outcomes than any other developed nation.
It's indefensible in so many ways.
Yeah.
How do you think about ancillary to that, like the opiate crisis and
Well, I think that's a great opportunity for integrative medicine because, it's very clear that chronic pain cannot be managed by opioids alone as standalone treatments, and that treatment has to be integrated.
Yeah.
So I just see that as an opportunity that's forcing people to look at, other ways of managing conditions.
Of all the alternative modalities that you've come across, hypnosis, meditation, breath work, yoga, all the like, what do you think are the most kind of underappreciated?
Well, as I told you, I'm a big fan of osteopathic manipulative treatment. I think that's great. It's unfortunate that only a small percentage of osteopaths today do manipulation as a primary therapy, and I hope that'll come back because it's a brilliant technique. As I said, I'm a huge enthusiast for mind-body interventions. The whole range of them I think are terrific. I have long tried to create and boost the field of nutritional medicine. And when I write treatment plans for patients, almost always the first item or a couple of items are about dietary change and making dietary change a primary therapy before you even think about other things to do.
Are there supplements that you recommend that you think are appropriate for?
Well, I think probably everybody should take a good multi-nutrient a supplement that has basic minerals and antioxidants. And I think a great public health intervention would be to provide a multi-nutrient supplement free to school kids.
That's a good idea. That seems like a no-brainer.
And to prison inmates, as I think it would do a lot.
Yeah.
Simple. So, and beyond that, I think it's probably a good idea for people to take vitamin D and check their vitamin D levels.
Yeah, I think most people are vitamin D deficient. We just live indoors.
Even in southern Arizona where I live, because dermatologists have made people so paranoid
afraid
about
of the sun. Yeah. Yeah. Well, also, it's not just a matter of going outside. It depends on where you live,
Of
right?
course,
Like you have to
time of
be pretty
year
far south in the time of the year for getting vitamin D.
Yeah. And it's like the line is through Atlanta. So if you live north of Atlanta, for half the year, the sun is at too low an angle for you to make vitamin D.
Right. So yeah, I think that would be important. How do you think about all of this in the context of the pandemic and COVID?
Well, I think the clear principle is that healthy organisms are resistant. So the healthier you are, the less likely that you are to contract that, or the less likely to get severely ill.
How dare you? We're not allowed to talk about that. This is dangerous.
But I also have to say I think we were so miserably unprepared in this country for this, and I hope it's a wake-up call because we're certain to be facing other and probably worse things like this, and I hope we get our act together next time.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, listen, it's all the things that we've been told to do are appropriate, from social distancing to masks and all of that. It's all fine, but it is frustrating that there is no conversation about taking personal responsibility for your health, and the idea that we should just be locked down and completely isolated and told to stay indoors, is really, that doesn't square with what we understand about what we need to do to optimize the immune function of our bodies.
Right. True.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that's going to change.
Final thing I wanted to ask you is if in some parallel universe you got called up to be Surgeon General, what would be top of mind to put in place in terms of regulations or policies?
Boy, I would really work on nutrition. I mean, I think that's such a crying need.
Remember when Michelle Obama tried to do that, though? She got crucified.
I know. But I think, it's got to be done. I mean, whether it's like putting a sin tax on sugary beverages, doing something about fast food restaurants and hospitals, this agricultural subsidies, all that stuff, I think is like, those are critical things that have to change.
It's crazy that there's still fast food restaurants and hospitals.
Unbelievable.
And how difficult it is to eradicate that.
I'll tell you one quick story. I got a letter a few years ago from a first-year medical student at University of Pennsylvania who started the campaign to get a McDonald's out of the university hospital. He got a petition going among his students. They got publicity in the Philadelphia papers, and he was called in by the dean of students who told him if he persisted in this, he'd jeopardize his medical degree. I mean, that's, in a nutshell, that's the problem.
Very, very wrong with our system.
Yeah.
That would be the case. It's terrible.
Yeah, terrible. The hospital, they'd signed a deal with the devil, and that was it.
I know. So this is what we're contending with. Yeah. So we need you to stick around for another 50 years.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. You're a gift. I'm so grateful for the work that you've done over the years and what you stand for. And it is cool to see culture catching up to you.
Yeah.
And it's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
If people want to connect with you.
My website is drweil.com, drweil.com. The website of my center at the University of Arizona is integrativemedicine.arizona.edu, and that has a Find a Practitioner link where you can find graduates of our program who are in all states and all specialties. Matcha.com is the website of Matchakari.
Right.
And
code rich 15.
Yes, get your discount. Right.
And True Food Kitchen.
Right.
I love True Food Kitchen.
Good. We've got 37 of them now, and I think we'll open more. And that's been very gratifying to me because basically, that's how I eat, and it's been good to see other people like me.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's very tailored.
And there's something for everyone there.
I go in there as a vegan, I never have any problems at all. I've been to the one in Santa Monica, and I've been to ones when I'm on the road traveling.
I'd like to see. I'm constantly pushing for more vegan options there. So I'm doing what I can.
I think you could do with a few more.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. And sometimes they're on the menu, but because not enough people order it or whatever, sometimes it's not available. So,
but if you ask, I mean, when they had their full menu, they'll make anything.
Yeah, they've done that for me.
Yeah,
they've done that for me, and I think it's cool that I mean, 30. How many? 35.
37.
37 of these.
Yeah.
To create a successful. I mean, it's not a chain like a fast food chain, but it is a franchise.
Yeah.
Is it a franchise?
It's not a franchise, no.
But there's that many that are doing that well with, kind of offering super healthy food.
Even in Texas and in Kansas City, and it's great to see that happening.
How many more are you looking to open?
We'll see. Once things normalize, we'll keep doing it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's good to have a robust commercial enterprise.
Yeah, that's been fun.
Offering healthy items for people. Good for you. All right, thanks, man. Well, come back and talk to me again sometime.
I'd love
to. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, appreciate it. Peace. Plants.
Plants, yes.
Yes.